Ready to learn a few hidden Ayaka mechanics? Wondering about pairing her with Furina? Or how to squeeze out some extra damage? Let's answer this and more with 7 advanced tips for every Ayaka main. As always, these videos avoid covering the basics and go straight into less known facts and ways to enjoy and maximize our mains. For the first tips, we look at her charge attack. The way it works is actually way more intricate than it looks. You would imagine that it just does damage in front of her, but actually, and to put it simply, the way it works is that in the first frames, the attack checks for enemies in front and locks onto them. Then, even if the target moves or teleports, damage will be done at their location in AoE. See how the enemy in front of me is just about to move, but I'm still able to get the damage in. Knowing this will let you avoid cancelling a charge attack that would otherwise land. And it works even if it's Ayaka herself getting moved, pushed without interruption, or lifted by an albedo skill, for example. Not much is going on for her skill, except the fact that he has some verticality to it, being able to hit a ring guard's weak point when he lowers down, for example. The same applies to her burst, which can hit a multitude of flying enemies. This burst is the most important part of her kit and represents most of her damage. It consists of 19 hits plus one final explosion. It is absolutely vital that it hits for as much as possible. That's why Ayaka's teams and rotations focus on it. One of her best teammates and one of the most popular pools in Genshin is Kazuha. He's incredibly strong with Ayaka, and I want to use him to show you two techs that can elevate your Ayaka gameplay. The first would be how Kazuha's skill can potentially ruin Ayaka's setup by shattering enemies and freeing them from freeze, which could result in them escaping the burst or at least part of it. One small trick that you can use here to still get the benefits of a Kazuha skill, like refreshing the very decent Veneer debuff, is to press it without actually plunging down. And to push this a little further, you can double press your jump key to open and close the glider to descend faster. I often use this when I don't have much Hydra application going or I know the enemy could easily escape. For example, when you freeze one of those samurai guys right as they are about to dash away and you know they're gone once the freeze is interrupted, even if briefly. Another thing you can do, and this is especially strong when considering Furina in your team, is to double swirl to buff both Furina summons and Ayaka. This is usually done by making sure there is a cryo aura on the enemy, but also an underlying Hydra aura. Kazuha's hold and burst at that point will give you the double buff, and you will see two sources of swirl damage when done right. This tip doesn't matter much when playing Kokomi or Bona, but with Furina it is vital. Now, something less about damage and more about practicality. A more newbie friendly tip, if you will, especially if you know your damage is enough for the content in front of you. If you and your enemies are in the perfect position to make them take full damage from your burst, then it's totally fine to not look for her Ascension 4 passive and risk your position by moving. Unlike a normal dash, alternative sprints like Ayaka's will always travel a minimum amount of distance, which make it very awkward in certain situations to find the perfect spot for your burst. It's usually not a problem, but in case, don't waste a good run just to get every single buff. Your rotation doesn't have to be set in stone, and missing some is okay in a more practical run. Next tip is going to be very brief and similar to what we talked about with Kazuha in a way. And that is how Catalyst users that are often used with Ayaka, like Mona and Kokomi, can weave in a normal attack just before casting their burst or skill. I believe Ayaka mains call this Insta Freeze or Instant Freeze, but anyway, it's a great way to stop them as soon as possible without wasting time. If the enemy moves a lot or is about to attack you, this works greatly. And of course, it works the same way around, if you apply some Hydra first and then find yourself needing to freeze with Charlotte, for example. Often not necessary, but it's another skill that you can add to your Ayaka's arsenal. Now, let's say you mean to be on field with Ayaka for a while after your burst. What's the best way to attack? And let me start this by saying that the following optimizations are a really tiny increase in her overall performance. And focusing on what we discussed so far, especially making sure your burst fully hits, is much more important. But in AoE scenarios, your best combo is going to be spamming N1C. It's very draining on your stamina, but also very quick. You would stick to N2C for general purposes and N3C when Xingqiu is with you, as it aligns its swords better. When performing a charge attack, it's also possible to cancel its animation faster by either dashing or jumping. Also, keep in mind that her skill greatly buffs normal charge attacks thanks to her Ascension 1, but only for 6 seconds while it has a 10 seconds cooldown. Still not an excuse for how bad their first constellation is. Let's talk about the new updates for Ayaka now, But before that, I wanted to let you know that these videos take a lot of time to research, so if you're willing to support me or my work, consider commenting or subbing to help my video reach more people. Furina is generally great for an Ayaka team, and she's extremely comfortable to play thanks to her very long skill duration, which allows you to forget about it and just use it once per rotation. Her IG application is great, but at times might not result enough if playing without good grouping abilities. So in a way, it doubles down on the need of Kazuha, even though he has a similar buff to the one Furina is giving you, which might also change the way you're building your Ayaka. Picture 200 fanfare points at talent level 10, that's 50% damage bonus. Now a 900 elemental mastery Kazuha is giving Ayaka 36% cryo damage. Add in a blitzer set and a crit weapon for a ton of crit value, and now the only thing your Ayaka is missing is probably a bunch of attack. Attack goblets might be very valuable depending on your weapons and stats. I always recommend using your best pieces based on substats, but if you're seeking the exact answer for your case, only a calculator will have it for you. It has to be noted that Ayaka's burst snapshots their stats when cast, but not Furina's fanfare, so technically you don't need to max them out before casting it, but getting as much as possible as fast as possible is of course beneficial. Further on, there are a few negatives in playing both Furina and Ayaka together, as Furina basically locks you into playing a healer. Yuna is not the best since her healing is just for the on-field character, plus it's not that high. Anemo healers like Jin and Sayu technically work, but in my opinion at a very big cost, at least for Kazuha owners. Jin's grouping is honestly just bad, but her healing is pretty decent. Sayu has no grouping and lower healing. I'd rather see Sucrose being played with an extra cryo unit to be honest than the Anemo healers, at least in AoE scenarios. We are left with two more options, Mika and Charlotte. As far as Mika, I'd say it's not the best use here, good healing but the attack speed buff is not that great and that's all he has to offer. Charlotte on the other hand is able to carry Trailing Tails and apply her elemental field. Unfortunately, this is also not the best use for Charlotte as she will require very high energy requirements and heal a bit less when carrying a 3-star HP catalyst, since she scales off attack. There are definitely new combination of teams that are possible thanks to these two units, and I don't want to totally disregard them as they can be very powerful. I'm also just considering the classic Fritz AoE teams, but there are definitely more uses, like Monocryo, Double Hydro, Bennett teams, but those are just less commonly looked for. And in my opinion, if you're already able to play a premium Ayaka team, you probably will look at Furina and Charlotte as side grades instead of upgrades for your team. Of course, their value could be much higher depending on your account. Onto builds, we now have access to Finale of the Deep, which is a fantastic Ayaka weapon when a healer is present. Ayaka will generally have a little less than 20k HP, and using the skill will create a bond of life of less than 5k HP. If you heal at 5k, you get a strong attack buff that will be even better at high refinements. This effect has the exact same cooldown as your elemental skill, so it works perfectly but requires your healer to be fast at healing that 5k. Because you want to follow up your skill with a burst to funnel your energy. And your burst will snapshot your attack, so it needs to be as high as possible on cast. This unfortunately makes your healer options more delicate and needs you to always pay attention to your rotation. Amenoma or basically any other weapon will have pretty much always the same rotations and are easier to play. Of course, this weapon will also need you to build a little bit more energy recharge, especially when comparing it to Amenoma. But if everything goes according to plan, it will give you more overall damage, even at R1. I made a video on the new healing set, but to recap that, it is actually a good option for a team that has Ayaka. The way its damage is calculated is similar to Shenhe or Yunjin buffs. It's an additive damage bonus, which means its base will be multiplied by Ayaka's crit and damage values, which she usually have a great abundance of. Of course, the set still has a problem with timing, as with continuous healing it will be activated every 6 seconds, regardless of which character you are on, and also its results are not that impressive. I would however generally recommend unlocking a great variance of pieces if you happen to farm for it or get it from the Abyss boxes, as you could work on many healers and tips. You might require very different stat spreads and not just the usual crit value chase. For more info about how it works exactly, I will put my other video in the description. And that was all for my Ayaka tips. Again, with these videos I try to keep a much more niche approach and focus on generally non-known mechanics and new meta updates. There is already enough content on the more basic things, like how to build and what teams to play in, but if you have a question, feel free to comment or visit over twitch.tv/7evenplays to ask me directly. Have a nice day and I'll see you in the next one.